In 1939, deep in Texas, a young black boy named Bernard Garrett spent his days polishing shoes on the streets, watching the world move around him, soaking in every bit of knowledge he could find. He was sharp, ridiculously smart, and had a hunger for learning that couldn't be ignored. But his education didn't come from books. It came from eavesdropping on white businessmen, listening to them talk about money, investments, and deals, trying to piece together the secrets of wealth. Of course, this was dangerous, and his father warned him time and time again that something as small as listening in could get him killed in a world built against him. But Bernard wasn't backing down. He had a mind for business and wanted to know how white folks made their money. His father knew his son was gifted, but he also knew the truth. Black people didn't have that privilege, no matter how smart they were. Fast forward to 1954, Bernard had grown into a man, married with a son, ready to chase his dreams. He moved to Los Angeles, settling into his wife's uncle's house, trying to figure out his next move. Over dinner, the uncle offered him a job at an aircraft assembly company, saying there was a vacancy, but Bernard had bigger plans. He wanted to make it in real estate, not just clock in and out at some job. The uncle laughed, shaking his head, calling it impossible, worried Bernard wouldn't even be able to pay rent. But Eunice, his wife, believed in him completely, knowing he was too smart to settle for less. The next day, Bernard hit the streets, searching for a property to buy and rent out using his savings from a previous business. He found a building, but the problem was clear. His money wasn't enough to cover repairs. Eunice, ever the problem solver, suggested finding a partner to boost their capital. She took Bernard to a club, introducing him to Joe Morris, an old acquaintance. But the moment Bernard saw Joe, lounging with two women on his lap, looking like a player straight out of a movie, he walked out immediately, telling Eunice he didn't need help from someone like that. She wasn't having it, telling him he had two choices: negotiate with the property owner himself or take Joe's help. Bernard, ever the independent thinker, chose to handle it alone. He met with Patrick Barker, the property owner, and pitched his plan to buy the building at a lower price, fix the damages, increase its market value, and fill it with black professionals who needed housing. If the building became fully occupied, Bernard would pay full price later. But there was one major problem. He was short $10,000. Not one to run out of ideas, Bernard noticed a gift calendar from Edward Reed, a banker in the area, and headed straight to the bank, hoping to secure a loan. Before he could even make an appointment, the receptionist shut him down immediately because he was black. Not willing to take no for an answer, Bernard waited outside, watching for Reed to leave. And when he finally caught up with him, he pitched his idea, saying the deal would benefit Barker too. That night back home, Bernard got a call from Barker asking why he used his name to apply for a loan. Barker called it bad business ethics, but Bernard apologized, saying he had no choice. Then Barker dropped a bombshell. Reed wanted to meet Bernard the next morning to approve the loan, and Barker was willing to be his guarantor. Bernard, stunned, asked why Barker was helping him, and Barker simply said that normal business ethics were made to harm black people, and he was against it. Bernard, grateful, realized that not all white people were the enemy. That night, Bernard and Eunice celebrated their success at Joe's club, and this time Joe wanted to talk. Joe actually liked seeing black people succeed, and he wanted to invest in Bernard's business. But Bernard was still hesitant, still thinking it was a bad idea. Joe, ever the realist, warned Bernard not to trust Barker too much. White people always looked out for their own profit first. In no time, Bernard started the building repairs, ready to turn his vision into reality. But on day one, before he even got started, a tenant protested, clearly hating the idea of Bernard owning the building. Bernard didn't let it get to him. He had a plan, and he was sticking to it. Bernard knew he had to move fast if he wanted to turn his vision into reality, so he hired a white man named Matt Steiner to help speed up the repairs. Matt wasn't the type to care about who he worked for. Black, white, it didn't matter to him. The only thing that mattered was money, and Bernard had a plan to make plenty of it. Together, they got to work fixing up the building, making sure every detail was handled right to increase the property value. But trouble wasn't far behind. One afternoon, two police officers showed up saying they had received a complaint from a tenant, none other than the same woman who had given Bernard grief the day before. She had gone straight to the cops, claiming Bernard had falsified the ownership of the apartment. The file was still being processed, but Bernard, always thinking ahead, had kept a copy just in case. When he handed it over, the officers had nothing left to say. Later that night, the same woman confronted Bernard again, demanding to know why he was still in the building after hours. Bernard, calm as ever, told her contractors weren't allowed there at night. But he wasn't a contractor. He was an occupant now. He had moved in. That was all it took. The next morning she packed up and left, refusing to live in the same building as a black man. Bernard didn't lose sleep over it. He had renters lined up, ready to take her place, and before long, the apartment was fully occupied, just as he had predicted. With the building thriving, Bernard was finally able to pay off his debt to Barker. Seeing Bernard's sharp business instincts, Barker made him an offer to partner up, split the profits 50-50. But there was a catch. Bernard could only persuade investors over the phone, making sure they never knew he was black, and if a representative was needed to sign contracts, Barker would handle it. Bernard agreed, knowing it was the only way to keep things moving. Together they built an empire, securing one property after another, stacking contracts like playing cards. Bernard even bought Eunice a better house, and for a while life was good. But good times never last forever. One day Patrick died in his sleep, and just like that, everything unraveled. His wife wasted no time cutting ties, refusing to work with Bernard simply because he was black. Worse, she wanted to buy a majority stake in all their assets at a price so low it was practically robbery, forcing Bernard to sell everything at a loss. And because his name wasn't on the sales contract since Barker had handled all the paperwork, Bernard had no legal ground to fight back. His lawyer told him he needed proof that Barker had intended to work with him for mutual benefit if he wanted to claim the assets. So Bernard went straight to the bank to meet Reed, hoping to find a way out, but Reed refused to see him. Before leaving, an idea hit Bernard like lightning. The building he was standing in was a commercial property packed with banking businesses. If he could own it, no bank inside could ever deny him a loan. He went straight to Joe, laying out his plan. Joe, ever the realist, pointed out the obvious. No black man had ever owned a major building in Los Angeles. The price would be sky high, and if the owner didn't want to sell, there was nothing they could do about it. But Bernard had a workaround. He called Matt, telling him to act as their representative in negotiations. A white face would open doors that Bernard and Joe couldn't. They would teach Matt everything he needed to know. And Matt, seeing the opportunity, agreed. The next morning, Joe dragged Bernard and Matt to a golf course at 6 sharp. According to Joe, Matt needed to live like a wealthy white man to convince their client, so he had a month to master golf. At the course, Joe introduced them to a trusted banker from San Francisco, someone willing to lend them money if the building purchase went smoothly. Bernard knew this was their shot, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. Bernard knew that if Matt was going to pull off this role convincingly, he needed more than just golf skills. He had to understand the numbers, the calculations, the financial language that would make him sound like a seasoned businessman. So besides training for golf, Bernard drilled Matt on math calculations, especially the growth rate of capitalization, making sure he could handle any financial scenario thrown his way. Weeks passed, and Matt kept himself busy, bouncing between studying math, practicing golf, and refining his table manners under Eunice's guidance. Slowly but surely, he transformed from a clueless rookie into someone who could hold his own in a high-stakes business conversation. Just a month ago, he couldn't do any of this, but now he could swing a golf club like a pro and rattle off complex calculations like they were second nature. Matt's real test was meeting Charles, the owner of the tallest building in Los Angeles, a 14-story giant that screamed wealth and power. To make sure Charles took Matt seriously, Joe arranged for the meeting to happen at an exclusive golf club, setting the stage for Matt to look like a wealthy investor rather than just some guy trying to buy a building. Matt wasn't confident, nervous about carrying out his role, but Joe reassured him, telling him he had the talent to pull it off. When the day came, Matt was invited to play with Charles, who just happened to be looking for an opponent. Of course, all of this had been arranged by Joe. Meanwhile, Joe and Bernard watched from outside the course, amazed at how well Matt handled himself. The mission was a success, and Matt left a strong first impression on Charles, proving he could play the part. But the real challenge was still ahead. Bernard knew that Matt had to impress Charles with his financial knowledge, so he spent the next week drilling him on every possible calculation scenario he might face. At first, it was overwhelming, but Matt pushed through, memorizing every number, every formula, every capitalization rate that Charles might throw at him. By the end of the week, Matt was ready. When the day of the negotiation arrived, Joe took Matt to Charles's office, where he was first invited for lunch before diving into business. Matt played his role flawlessly, so much so that even Charles's accountant struggled to keep up with the quick calculations. Matt rattled off, though in reality it was more memory work than actual math. Matt presented Charles with two choices, both structured to look profitable, and after weighing his options, Charles picked one, sealing the deal. With the contract signed and Charles vacating his office, the team celebrated their success. Joe laughed, saying the white businessmen downstairs would be shocked when they realized who really owned the building now. Of course, Matt continued playing the role of the leader, while Joe and Bernard remained his business partners. Matt soon married his wife and kept up appearances as the face of their growing empire. Now that they owned the building, the banks had no excuse to deny them loans. With capital flowing in, Bernard and Joe quickly took over properties across Los Angeles, shifting ownership from white landlords to the black community. Before long, the majority of property ownership in LA was in their hands, and their success even caught the attention of the vice president, who paid them a visit. By 1963, Bernard and his family traveled back to Texas to visit his parents. His father welcomed him warmly, proud of the man his son had become. He still remembered Bernard's childhood dream to make money like white people, and told him that moving away had been the best decision he ever made. If he had stayed, he might still be polishing shoes on the street. The next day, Bernard and his son walked around the neighborhood near his father's house, and the contrast was striking. The homes of black families looked worn down, neglected, while the houses of white families stood pristine. Texas hadn't changed much. Racism still ran deep, just like it had in the old days. As they passed a bank, Bernard stopped, staring at the building, an idea forming in his mind. Mainland Bank. If he could buy it, he could change the lives of black people in Texas, just like he had done in Los Angeles. Later, he told Eunice that it was time to do for Texas what they had done for LA, to help their community rise. When they returned home, Bernard wasted no time telling Joe about his plan, but buying a bank was a whole different game from buying commercial property. Bernard knew it was nearly impossible. Black business owners in Texas faced obstacles at every turn, but he wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it for the black community. If they could own the bank, black families could finally get loans to buy homes, start businesses, and build wealth. Joe, ever the realist, pointed out that there were plenty of other ways to help their people, but Bernard was set on this. If Joe didn't want to partner with him, he'd find someone else. Bernard's stubbornness finally got to Joe, and with a smirk, he called the plan crazy, but agreed to join him anyway. Matt had become their go-to frontman, the face of their operation, the one who could convince white businessmen to sign deals without hesitation. This time, he was accompanied by Joe's trusted banker from San Francisco, heading straight into negotiations with the owner of Mainland Bank and his son, Florence. As expected, Matt handled the meeting flawlessly, navigating the conversation with precision and confidence. And before long, the agreement was sealed. Matt would be the new bank president, while Florence would step down from managing loans, now required to report everything to Matt. With the deal secured, Bernard wasted no time reaching out to the local pastor community, telling them that under his ownership, the bank's loan policies for black people would change. He asked them to help find responsible loan applicants within their churches, but urged them to move quietly, keeping the ownership under wraps. Bernard didn't want the public to catch wind of the shift too soon. He knew that if word got out, there would be backlash. It didn't take long for the black community's businesses to flourish, just as Bernard had envisioned. But the sudden change didn't go unnoticed. Florence, growing suspicious, confronted Matt one afternoon, baffled by the sheer number of loans approved in just a week. Matt, keeping his cool, explained that higher loan approvals meant higher bank profits, brushing off Florence's concerns. But Florence wasn't convinced. He started digging deeper, scrutinizing the names of the borrowers, realizing they sounded distinctly black. Determined to uncover the truth, he visited one of the loan recipients, confirming his suspicions. Florence followed Matt everywhere, watching his movements, tracking his meetings, and soon enough, he discovered the truth. Matt was working with Bernard and Joe. Furious, he showed up at Bernard's house, demanding to meet the men who had bought his family's bank. The confrontation was tense, Florence throwing threats, warning them that if the public found out that Mainland Bank was owned by two black men and regularly gave loans to black people, the bank would collapse. Bernard, unfazed, told Florence to cut to the chase, asking him what he wanted. Florence accused them of deceiving him and his father, but Joe, ever the strategist, reminded him that their names were on the signed contract. Joe had even been present at the deal, although disguised as a driver, ensuring everything was legally airtight. Bernard then pointed out that Florence's father had known all along. He had been fully aware that Matt was working with two black men, and he hadn't cared. Florence, realizing he had been outplayed, was furious. He handed them a letter from the Financial Audit Bureau of the American Treasury Department, stating that the bank would undergo an annual inspection due to reports of unsafe loans. After Florence left, Bernard ordered an immediate halt on loans to black applicants until the inspection was complete. Matt, thinking ahead, suggested buying another bank to move the loans elsewhere. They set their sights on First National Bank of Marlin, a smaller institution compared to Mainland Bank. Matt explained that with $270,000, they could buy it outright, transferring all black loans from Mainland Bank to Marlin Bank before the inspection hit. The discussion continued at Matt's house, where he laid out the numbers. Marlin Bank had $2 million in deposits, but could only lend $1 million, meaning they could profit from the gap. His calculations were solid, but Bernard wasn't convinced. It sounded too good to be true, and with Joe stuck in LA managing their properties, they already had too much on their plate. Matt, frustrated, pushed back. If they didn't take the risk, he might as well head back to LA. It wasn't about selfishness, he said. It was about learning from them, about taking risks for bigger rewards, just like they had taught him. In the end, they went for it, buying Bank of Marlin, with Matt as president-director. But Bernard wasn't about to let go of oversight. He had Eunice, his wife, secretly work as a cleaning service employee at the bank, keeping an eye on Matt's decisions. That night, as the bank was closing, Eunice pulled Matt aside, telling him she wanted him to succeed, but reminding him that he had only been in banking for 3 months. He needed to be careful, not reckless. To ensure that Marlin Bank's loan applicants were credible, Bernard and his cousin conducted secret audits, handing the results to Matt to help him verify files before approving loans. Bernard also advised him to consult a lawyer he trusted to review every loan agreement before signing off. Matt had always admired Bernard and Joe, knowing he was lucky to learn from two men who understood the business better than anyone. But when his wife visited him at his office, she made a racist remark, dismissing the idea that Bernard and Joe could possibly be better than him. The comment rubbed Matt the wrong way. These men weren't just business partners, they were his friends, and hearing his wife belittle them like that left him annoyed. Soon after, Matt received a call from Florence, informing him that 4 Mainland Bank customers wanted to close their accounts after hearing that the bank was owned by black people. The situation escalated further when the next day, Matt was visited by an auditor from the Federal State Bank at the Bank of Marlin. Panicked, Matt immediately contacted Bernard, shocked that the audit was happening at Marlin instead of Mainland Bank, and even more confused that it was happening a month earlier than scheduled. Bernard knew Matt wasn't ready to handle this alone, so he had no choice but to step in. Forced to disguise himself as a cleaning service worker, Bernard swallowed his pride, knowing that lowering his dignity as a black man was the only way to help Matt without drawing suspicion. The audit began, and Bernard managed to assist Matt with the first question, but before he could continue, the auditor shut the door, cutting Bernard off from the conversation. Matt, left to fend for himself, struggled under the pressure. He tried to explain that he had an expert who had developed a methodology for assessing loans, but unfortunately that person wasn't present. Desperate, he excused himself, pretending to check a file, but instead rushed to the restroom to seek Bernard's help. Bernard quickly laid out the standard calculations he used, hoping Matt could retain the information under stress. Matt returned, trying to recall everything Bernard had told him, but before he could explain his methodology, the auditor dismissed it, saying it was no longer relevant. While waiting for Matt, the auditor had already found irregularities in the Bank of Marlin's loan files. The bank had violated national banking regulations, which prohibited lending more than 10% of its capital. Despite appearing legitimate, the loans were riddled with violations. Matt took the file straight to Bernard and Joe, and Bernard was stunned by the discovery. The situation worsened when they realized Matt had hired a lawyer recommended by Florence instead of the one they had advised him to use. Bernard couldn't believe he was learning about this disaster while dressed as a janitor in a restroom. It was clear now. Florence had set them up, orchestrating their downfall. Because of this misstep, Bernard lost around $300,000. He finally accepted the harsh reality. Business in Texas was brutal. Joe had warned him that Texas wasn't a place for black entrepreneurs, and now that warning had proven true. Bernard and Joe decided to cut their losses, leave the Bank of Marlin, and sell it. Bernard instructed Matt to focus on stabilizing Mainland Bank to prevent further withdrawals from white customers. But Matt wasn't ready to let go. He still wanted to salvage the Bank of Marlin and redeem himself. The next morning, Joe received an urgent call from his banker in San Francisco. He had received insider information from the Federal Audit Bureau that Matt Steiner had secretly used Mainland Bank's money to cover the loan issues at the Bank of Marlin. Furious, Joe immediately called Bernard, and together they stormed into Mainland Bank to confront Matt. Joe tore into him, calling his decision reckless and illegal. It was outright fraud. Bernard warned Matt that his actions could destroy their business at both banks. Shortly after, representatives from the Financial Audit Bureau arrived at Mainland Bank, announcing that the bank would be shut down under national banking regulations. Matt was immediately fired as president-director, but the worst was yet to come. Bernard and Joe were arrested by the FBI without any explanation. The lawsuit from the state bank was eventually dropped, but the federal case remained, meaning the senators would hold a trial questioning how two black men had managed to buy a bank full of white customers and approve loans for black people. The case had now entered the political arena, and their lawyer warned them that if they fought back, they risked facing criminal charges. Meanwhile, Matt met with Senator McClellan, who offered him a deal. If he shifted all responsibility onto Bernard and Joe, he would receive legal immunity. If he refused, he would face 50 years in prison for deceiving the public about the true ownership of Mainland Bank and the First National Bank of Marlin, along with illegally transferring loans between the two banks. When the federal trial began, Matt made his decision. He testified that he was merely a subordinate, claiming that Bernard and Joe had made all the decisions. After his confession, he walked out of the courtroom, his face heavy with regret and disappointment. Bernard, accompanied by his lawyer, met Senator McClellan, who wasted no time laying out his terms. The senator offered Bernard legal immunity, but only if he confirmed that everything Matt had testified was true. If Bernard refused or even attempted to bring up racism and the systemic oppression of black people, he would be thrown in jail. The weight of the decision hung heavy, but Bernard knew he couldn't just roll over and accept defeat. When the day of the trial arrived, Joe, ever the loyal friend, told Bernard that no matter what happened, he considered him a revolutionary, a man who had fought fearlessly against the injustice faced by black people. He respected him for that, and nothing could change it. Standing before the senator and members of Congress, Bernard delivered his statement with unwavering conviction. He reminded them that under the law, all people were created equal, entitled to the same legal protections. But in reality, that was a lie. Instead of discussing unsafe banking practices, the trial had turned into an interrogation about how two black men had managed to buy a bank in Texas. Bernard didn't hold back. He called out the blatant discrimination, pointing out how black people were systematically barred from economic advancement. His words struck a nerve, and the senator, unwilling to hear the truth, had Bernard thrown out of the courtroom. After the trial, the federal government seized all of Bernard and Joe's assets, following the ruling orchestrated by Senator McClellan. In 1965, an all-white jury convicted them of misappropriation of bank funds, sentencing them to 3 years in prison. Out of nearly 200 buildings they had owned, Eunice was only able to keep one, because it was in her name. 3 years later, Joe and Bernard were finally freed, but their empire had crumbled. When Eunice asked what they planned to do next, Joe and Bernard revealed a secret. The government had no idea that they still owned 2 buildings in the Bahamas. Before Matt had testified against them, he had called Bernard late at night. Bernard had told him to take the senator's deal, but after that, he instructed him to buy property in the Bahamas, ensuring they had something left to rebuild. After their downfall, Bernard and Joe quietly rebuilt their fortunes in the Bahamas before returning to America. 3 years after their testimony before the Senate, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968, making it illegal to refuse to sell or rent property based on race, religion, or gender. Though they had lost everything, their fight had helped change the law, ensuring that future generations wouldn't have to face the same barriers they had.